Fantastical. Okay, good evening.
Um,
Yes?
Go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of March 22nd, 2021 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is JD Pachariva, and I'm Counselor and Chair of Community Services and Infrastructure Committee. We are meeting electronically through Zoom during this declared emergency period. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast on our YouTube channel. I will ask our clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm quorum. Devane, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton,
Present.
Councillor Regina,
I'm here.
Councillor Russell,
I'm here.
Councillor Bernay,
Present.
Councillor Pachariva,
I am also present.
Councillor McPherson,
Here.
Councillor McLick,
Here.
Councillor Timmers,
Present.
and Councillor Reimer. We have
Here.
quorum, Chair. Chair, we have quorum.
Okay, that's great. In addition, I would like to take a couple minutes to introduce our staff. We also have joining us electronically today. We've got our Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Mike Kirkopoulos, Director of Finance, Administration, and Innovation, Lawrence Wagner, Associate Director of Finance and Administration, Terry Trawala, Director of Special Projects, Kathleen Dale, Director of Planning and Development, Matt Bruder, Director of Community Services, Shannon McKay, Associate Director of Recreation and Culture, Sarah Ain, Fire Chief Greg Hudson, Lincoln Public Library CEO, Julie Andrews, Director of Economic Development and Communications, Paul Deaney, Manager of Corporate Communications, Liliana Busnello, Economic Development Assistant, Cameron Rotz, Tourism Coordinator, Brittany Bezlewski, Director of Public Works, Dave Graham, Manager of Environmental Services, Julian Harris, Climate Change Coordinator, Shannon Fernandez, Town Clerk, Julie Kirkolos, Legislative and Committee Coordinator, Aaron Plant, and moderating and clerking this evening, we have our Deputy Clerk, Devane Kripp. IT staff are also in attendance should anything run amok. As this is a virtual meeting, I will ask that we follow some procedures during tonight's electronic meeting. Should there be a connection or service disruption for the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and/or clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and to regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair, the clerk will ask those in attendance to wait up to 10 minutes to provide the chair time to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time frame, the vice chair will resume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes their role. So Vice Chair Reimer, you're on your best behavior in case something happens, but I'm alone here, so it would only be gremlins that disrupt us. Each member of council who wishes to speak, press the raise hand feature on your video call, and the clerk, and in this case, our deputy clerk, will track our speakers list today and then invite you to speak, and I will open it for comments or questions. Also, when I finish reading a motion and announce the mover, the clerk will then call out the vote by reading each member of council's name out loud. Please remember to take yourselves off mute. I repeat, please remember to take yourselves off mute during this portion of the meeting so you can confirm if you support or oppose said motion. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourself on mute. Councillor Timmers, I'll make sure I move this microphone out so we don't hear me breathing. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? So I've got a couple. I've got Councillor Reimer with respect to item 6.3.5 regarding Queen Street Sanitary Sewer Upsizing Tender Award, PW 1121. And then Councillor Reimer again for 8.1.1 and 8.3.1 regarding zoning bylaw amendment application by Owen Barkway, PLZATU 202-00113 PD 19-21. Correct, Vice Chair Reimer?
That is correct. The first item you mentioned, 6.3.5, the company mentioned is the company that I work for. And on the second item, you mentioned Chair Patriva, Owen Barkway is my son-in-law. So I'll be declaring interest in those items. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Reimer. I see no other conflicts. Do any members have any amendments to the tonight's agenda? Again, I see nothing. We have no statutory public meetings tonight. Although there are no statutory public meetings occurring for this evening's Committee of the Whole, staff have established procedures for the public to participate at future meetings if they so wish to. Information is available on our town website. For any future notices of public meetings, we'll also provide direction on how the public can participate. So we're now at the delegations portion of the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda. Please note that each delegation may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Our first delegation tonight is Thomas Wicks, Manager, Acquisitions and Conservation Services, Ontario Heritage Trust, regarding the Ellis Property Slope Stabilization Project. Presentation is approximately 10 minutes. So prior to proceeding with the presentation, I will ask Council if we can proceed with the majority vote to extend the speaking time for Mr. Wicks. I have a motion moved by Councillor Tibbers. The Council extends the speaking time for the delegation from Thomas Wicks, Ontario Heritage Trust, until the presentation is completed. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton, and that carries.
Thank you, Devane. Mr. Wicks, welcome. And please let us know a little bit about the slope stabilization project and the Ontario Heritage Trust. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me?
Mhm.
Good. Perfect. So I believe I have a presentation that I've prepared, and I
Yeah.
believe that will be shared for you to see.
Can
Perfect.
everyone see the presentation?
All right. So thank you for having me. As was mentioned, my name is Thomas Wicks. I'm the Manager of Acquisitions and Conservation Services at the Ontario Heritage Trust. And I wanted to take this opportunity to just explain to all of you the work that we're planning to do at the Ellis Property as part of a slope stabilization project. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So I didn't want to take for granted that everybody listening was aware of what the Ontario Heritage Trust is or what we do. So I did want to spend a little bit of time going over that and then sort of relate that to the work at Ellis Property. So the Ontario Heritage Trust is an agency of the Ministry of, was Culture. It has a much longer name now, Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries. We were established in 1967. We're mandated through legislation, so through the Ontario Heritage Act, to identify, preserve, protect, and promote Ontario's heritage. Go to the next one, please. So just some of the key impacts of the work that we do. We currently engage annually with around 950,000 people at our sites and through our programs. We protect approximately 500 properties. So these are properties that are natural heritage properties, cultural heritage properties, archaeological properties, and we protect those through either fee simple ownership or through heritage conservation easement agreements. And within those holdings, we have 44 National Historic Sites, 170 registered archaeological sites, almost 7,500 hectares of environmentally sensitive lands, which are protected, which provide habitat for 61 species at risk. We're working in 85% of communities in Ontario, and we do partner as well with many Indigenous communities. We're a not-for-profit agency, I should mention that as well. We tell Ontario stories through our plaque programs. This is probably the oldest program we have, those gold and blue plaques. You see them all over there. There's about over 1,200 of those currently. We also run museum sites. We have collections, including almost 1 million artifacts associated with our archaeological sites. We've hosted symposia, and we also organize and manage the Doors Open Ontario program, which is quite a successful program in the province. So the next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of the distribution of the sites that we own, so we work again all over the province, and you can see there's a higher concentration along the Niagara Escarpment, so from Niagara all the way to the top of the Bruce. Next one, please. So speaking of natural heritage in particular, because the Ellis property is considered to be a natural heritage property, we have currently 83 natural heritage easements, 178 natural heritage fee simple properties, of which Ellis is one of them. They protect a variety and represent a variety of ecotypes across the province. 63% of these sites are actually accessible through trails. And what we've discovered through the course of the pandemic, of course, is that the interest in access to trails has only grown quite a lot, actually. Speaking specifically about the trust-owned properties, 79% of those have access to trails. 32 sites have parking lots, or 101 actually have access through a network of trails. And a significant portion of the network of trails is actually encompassed within the Bruce Trail, of which we have over 125 kilometers. So the next slide, please. So speaking specifically around fee simple properties, or properties we own, because Ellis is one of those properties. So these are typically managed by the trust directly or through partnerships through a stewardship agreement with a property steward. So in the past, we have had actually a property steward for the Ellis property, which was the Conservation Authority. So what we do is we have a stewardship agreement, there's a mutually agreed upon management plan, and it creates a relationship and dialogue between ourselves and the property steward. But it does also require ongoing monitoring, and we sort of, an ongoing relationship that we form, and we really value those partnerships a great deal. So the next slide, please. So with specific regard to Ellis, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with this property, but I do think it's worth going over that the portion that the trust owns here within the valley. So that's outlined in red. And then what we have as well is we have the main trail, which is in yellow on the map, and that connects from a parking lot at the north end, and it winds its way through a wetland and up kind of a squiggly path up to where the community museum is currently located within the community of Jordan. Now, we also know that there are some what we would refer to as unsanctioned trails that run through the property as well, particularly the one that goes south from the main trail all the way to the parking lot. That's the one that goes kind of along the creek. But the main trail, which is about 1 kilometer long, is the one that you see there in yellow. So the next slide, please. So just a little bit of information on Ellis. It's a 23-hectare property. It's a provincially significant natural heritage property. It was donated generously to the trust in 1984. And within that property, because it's in a Carolinian region, it's a rarer region within Ontario because it's in the far south or southwest of the province. It has 41 species at risk, environmentally sensitive area, provincially significant wetland, an area of natural or scientific interest. There are archaeological sites registered on the property, and it's part of the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and it's identified as being an escarpment natural area. So the next slide, please. So this is a graphic which will kind of zero in on the area that we're specifically concerned about. So you will probably recognize this very well, as the community museum is at the top on the tablelands within the valley. You can see there's a fry house has been identified. This photo was taken before the museum was constructed, but I'm sure you'll be able to see where that's currently being completed. And there are two areas I just wanted to highlight, which are specifically labeled as the slope erosion site 1, slope erosion site 2. And they're along the edge of the slope down into the valley. Even within this particular graphic, you can see areas of significant erosion. They're immediately adjacent to the portion of property that's owned by the municipality as part of the museum site, and has the fry house, as I mentioned, as well as there are grave sites as well in that area. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of one of those archaeological sites. This is a midden site. It's located just to the north of the stairs that go down into the valley. So that's, again, part of the trail that's quite popular, where 2 metal staircases and a kind of switchback path connect down into the lower valley where the main portion of the trail is located. Next slide, please. So at the top of the tablelands, again, just to kind of contextualize this, there's the structure here which houses the historic cider press. Behind it, you can see just with the yellow sign and there's a little bit of metal visible, and that's the entrance down into the valley with the staircase. Next slide, please. So this one is, again, the Fry House, so part of that museum site. Next, please. Okay, so this is a photo that was taken to show some of the area of erosion. Now, this is a winter photograph, so you don't get to see the contrast between the exposed soil and the green that would be around it. But I think it's quite clear the area of erosion where there's no vegetation and it's just exposed soil. So what you can see is happening is this is an ongoing process. At the top, you can see there's a tree where the roots are starting to be washed away from beneath as the soil erodes, exposing those roots. So the tree is currently performing a function in terms of stabilizing the top, but that is being undermined by this ongoing process of erosion. So when this problem or issue was identified initially, we did have some geotechnical reports that were prepared in recent years that sort of suggested ways of mitigating this. And so it's been on our radar for in the recent years in terms of something that we needed to address. So the next slide, please. So this one shows, again, the same area, but a little bit closer up. You can see that because of the ongoing erosion, we don't see any vegetation forming here, and there are various factors for that. But again, it's something of ongoing concern and would lead to potential safety risks, certainly undermines the tablelands at the top of the valley, and could potentially present both a natural heritage risk to the species there and also potentially as well to visitors to the site. Next slide, please. So again, this is one of those trees that's clinging desperately to the edge of the slope. It's being washed out from below, and it's, again, in a state where, as that process continues, the tree is at risk of being essentially washed and pulled down into the valley. Next graphic, please. So this is the staircase. There's two staircases. Well, there's one at the bottom left you can see more clearly, and at the top right you can see a little bit of the metal. And then connecting them is a path. And this is part of that trail that I referenced before. So in terms of our understanding, we know in a future phase, we would like to improve the condition of this particular portion of the property. To that end, we have engaged a landscape architect to study it. But the primary project for which we have funding this year and for which we are, which I'm here to present to you today, is related specifically to the stabilization work. So the next slide, please. So again, this is just a graphic showing the current condition of that trail that's going from the staircase down at the bottom of the valley and through this kind of path that connects to the second staircase and would bring you up to the museum at the top. Next, please. So this is, again, stabilization portion of the presentation. Next, please. Okay, so the intent really with this is to address the slope stabilization and to do a bit of restoration work there. So that would include things like water diversion, slope stabilization, vegetation replanting. The future intention would be, of course, as well to improve the safety of the trail that leads down into the property. But I want to emphasize that that is at this stage for us a future intention, and that could lead as well to things like additional stairs, potentially a boardwalk or trail improvements. But for now, we're focusing on the slope stabilization work. Next, please. So as part of that work, what we're doing is we're engaging some professional consultants. That includes archaeological consultants and geotechnical consultants. So the first phase for that would be an archaeological assessment. It would be a modified stage 2 within the area of the valley there. There'll be an implementation of erosion and drainage control strategies. So a consultant would be going in and reviewing existing data and reports, performing a site assessment, preparing designs and recommendations and costing and tendering documentation that would go then into a phase 2, which would have the construction work. So those are both contemplated for this year. The trail infrastructure improvements could be incorporated potentially if feasible, but again, there's no guarantee that that would be the case this year. But of course, we're positioning ourselves with this work to kind of just move ourselves in the right direction and address some of the things that we need to do moving forward before we can get to that stage. And that's it. So I just want to share, though, with you, I guess, some of the maybe general timelines we're working with for this project. We've gone through a procurement process. We're working our way through that so that we can retain the consultant, the geotechnical and archaeological consultants, who will then do their work. There will be an issuance of another RFP related to construction. That would happen potentially in late April, award that contract, and then move through to doing the actual work. And that would be contemplated for completion by the end of June of this year. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, Councillor Patriva, you're muted.
Yes, I am. So, sorry about that. Thank you very much, Thomas, for your presentation. Nice to put a face to the Ontario Heritage Trust, and you're our point person. So, pleasure to meet you, and very informative. So, thank you very much. Any questions from council to Mr. Wicks? Okay.
We have Councillor Rajima.
Councillor Renchima, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The museum property is the town of Lincoln's property, so I'm wondering what role we, if any, will have in this whole process from the hiring of the consultants all the way through to construction.
Yeah, so I guess the short answer to that would be we've had sort of a working relationship with the town for quite some time, and we've kept them aware of this project and the steps that we are facing with this, and in terms of getting information and trying to sort of work collaboratively, at least in terms of sharing information as we have it. So I wouldn't say there's an expectation right now that the town would be responsible for implementing the project. This is something that we would be responsible for doing, but certainly we would ensure that all information is shared so that there's understanding of what's happening within the community as well, particularly within the area immediately adjacent to where the work would be happening, so that the community within that context would understand what's happening there.
Thank you. And a question of clarification, Mr. Chair, please.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Councillor Renchima.
Thank you. So you said that you're expecting construction to start soon, end of April, June?
We would hope that it would be able to start in mid-May or so. That's the goal. And then we would be hoping to complete it by the end of June.
Oh, okay, that's good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. I think Councillor Michaluk is next. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Wicks, thank you for coming. Great presentation. Appreciate what you're doing. Looking at the trail map, I see the main trail and I see the unsanctioned trail. I'm thinking you've walked that unsanctioned trail. Has there been any consideration for the future to make that unsanctioned trail a sanctioned trail? I personally walk it. I think it's beautiful. I'd love for that trail to one day be connected to Jordan Hollow Park. What are your thoughts for the future with that regard?
Sure. So I think that's a very good question, and it's certainly one that's on our radar. I have walked the trail myself. I also have a colleague here from the Trust, Kevin DeMille, he's also familiar with the property. So I would say that, yes, we would be interested in trying to make that trail an improved trail with proper access that's safe to use, and that would be included as part of maybe a broader trail system. I think the challenge for us right now is, it's just a matter of gaining funding for that, to be honest with you. It's just a question of the financial feasibility. So we're sort of taking this in smaller chunks where we can to address certain things, and it's sort of a step-by-step process for us. So it's certainly on the radar, 100%. It would be considered within a future plan, and I think part of that would also be potentially getting a steward for the property as well. That would also help us, I think, in terms of trying to realize some of those bigger picture objectives for the property overall.
Thank you very much for that answer. And for actually walking that unsanctioned trail and agreeing with me that there is a lot of potential there. In your professional estimation, who would we advocate to for that sort of funding? Which governing bodies would we? And this may be a question for staff or yourself, as far as who would we advocate to?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, staff may have some thoughts on that, that potentially could help answer that question. But that's something that we could investigate as well in terms of where could we potentially receive funding. Like I mentioned, as a not-for-profit agency, we're not unfamiliar with that process. Sometimes because we are a provincial agency, it does change where and how we can or who we can ask for funding from. But certainly I think it's something that I know from my part, for the trust part, we would be very interested in collaboratively working with the municipality if possible to kind of explore those options.
Director McKay, I see your hand up. Would like to chime in? I'm sure you've got some information.
I would. Thank you, Chair. So through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we have been working, staff have been working with Ontario Heritage Trust for the last several years, especially since the plans were finalized for the design of the new museum. And we have on a number of occasions discussed how OHT on their own are somewhat limited in who they can apply for funding from because of the way they're structured at the provincial level. But certainly we could look at co-applications and partnering on grant applications and funding. And we have previously explored that with OHT staff, and we'd like to continue doing that. I mean, it is in our interest to have that slope stabilized. It's in our interest to have those stairs completed and to have the rest of the trail, quite honestly, to the south finished. While there is no formal stewardship agreement in place with OHT, we have been working on a PTE, a permission to enter. And for the past several years, community services staff have been regularly walking that the main trail and inspecting it. And if trees are down or if garbage is found or something is unsafe, we have been taking care of it. So there has been an ongoing relationship, but we see opportunities to partner for funding. It could be at the federal level, it could be at the provincial level, it could be at other through other agencies, and we do continue to talk about that. So
very much. I just see tremendous potential through what we're thinking of with the Jordan Hollow Park, connecting that to the Jordan Museum. It's like a travel through time sort of theme that we could be implementing. I think one thing COVID has done is it's gotten a lot of people walking on trails and walking anywhere that they feel might be safe. So I just want to put that on the radar. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Michalak. And if it helps to, years ago, I was privy to a plan that the Conservation Authority had to link actually Balls Falls down to Jordan Harbor with, a boardwalk and trail network. And they were the steward of the trust, Mr. Wicks pointed out, rural economic development. So there's RED funding out there. There's grants from the federal government for trail expansion, and Jackie Gervais from the region, we're on a mailing list, and Jackie sends out a weekly newsletter, and changed a little bit because she's seconded to the vaccine clinics. But there's constantly places to go and get some funding. But a lot of it's partnership. So Balls Falls was built on a partnership with the Conservation Authority, the town, the region, the 20 Valley Tourism Association. So, possibilities to do something similar here to reinvigorate the Ellis property, I'm sure, is welcomed by the Ontario Heritage Trust and ourselves. And I can see Kevin nodding, and we put our heads together and we come up with a plan. So nothing nothing is off the table. So yeah, great question, Councilor Mikulak. I thought maybe those bottles weren't relics, but maybe you had left them there on one of your hikes. But I stand corrected by Mr. Wicks. So artifacts, that's what
Yes.
we're going to be calling them. So Mayor Easton, you're up next.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have two areas of clarification. One is in relation to who the trust partners are at the moment. And also the second one is I think we need to have more definition around the impacted area, because I'd like to know how far south it goes as well. So in the first question, Mr. Wicks, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. And I was very pleased to see that the Ontario Heritage Trust is looking at this as an important responsibility. But I am confused about the relationship with the Conservation Authority. And it was my understanding within the last 7 years that there was an interruption in the responsibility of the Conservation Authority and in that relationship. So I think it's important for us to have clarity on that.
Sure, I can answer the question through the chairman. So the agreement originally was signed and it had an expiry date. So really what happened was that agreement expired, it came to an end, and we were notified that they were not going to opt to renew that, which to tell you the truth is something that can happen. As I say, these are relationships, they're valued, they're partnerships, but sometimes conditions do change for one party or the other, and it sometimes impacts that relationship moving forward. And this is one of those cases. So it wasn't terminated so much as it came to an end, and it was not renewed by the Conservation Authority.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, I'm still unclear. Do we have any stewards at all at the present time? Or do we have any trust partners at the moment?
Sure, I can answer that to the chair. The partnership, so as I mentioned in the presentation, with some properties that we own, we actually are directly the ones stewarding the property. In this particular case, I would describe that as a property that we're responsible for stewarding directly ourselves. However, as Shannon did mention, we're working through a relationship with a PTA related specifically to the trail component of the property. So I would consider that to be a beneficial relationship, certainly, I think, within the context of ourselves and the community. But I wouldn't describe that as necessarily our steward. Currently, we do not have a steward for the property, I guess is the short answer for that.
All right, Mr. Chairman, that's very helpful. And okay, so then the second clarification that I require is you were very clear at the north end or the south end that it's the parking lot in that area. So it's right up at the south end of Main Street, correct? That's where it starts? The area in question?
So just to make sure I understand the question, you're asking about the south area of erosion and where that ends and starts?
Yes.
So that is, yeah, it's sort of, I'm trying to picture that graphic again that I showed, but it's a little bit near so if you were at the Fry House, part of the museum, where the valley starts, and then a little bit to the south of that, if that makes sense. So it is adjacent, or it is sort of contiguous to the municipal portion of the lands, as opposed to where there are some residences that actually end on the ravine or onto the valley. I would point out, though, that a challenge, I guess, ongoing for us would be things like throwing yard waste or trees or clippings or that kind of thing down into the valley from some residents' yard. That is something that we would have some concern about, and I think that's part of what we would like to convey to the public as we move through this process, is just sort of ways in which adverse effects to the condition of the soil within the valley could be addressed through things like not putting down yard clippings or that kind of thing. So that's something we're concerned about as well. It's just, we don't want any of that area to expand. I hope I answered your question in terms of where the area is.
It hasn't. So you're saying it's near the Fry House, and then it goes how far to the north?
It's sort of, it is an area that's, okay, yes, this is helpful. Someone is putting up the presentation. So I can't control the mouse here, but maybe, is it possible to go to the image that was taken, would have been an aerial photograph showing the site that was labeled? There we go. So I think you can see here where it's labeled as slope erosion site 1. So there's the shed that's behind the Fry House, and it's that area in particular. And there are some isolated areas, I think, just a little bit to the south of that, but it is in the area there labeled with slope erosion site 1.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, how, to the presenter, how far does it go to the south? I'm sorry, north, to the
The
north.
north.
Yeah.
Oh, to the north. I don't know in terms of the exact meters. I'm sorry, I don't have that answer, but you can see where the, in this graphic where it's kind of a lighter gray, it's not the entire side of that slope. So it's not as wide as it is long, at least is the way it appears in this particular graphic, if that's of help.
Okay. All right, Mr. Chairman, maybe for further clarity, maybe we could have another image that shows how far it goes. I'll move on to my question. And so my question, the reason I was looking for this clarity was in regard, Mr. Wicks, to any impact on any museum tablelands, particularly when you showed the photograph of the apple press, and whether or not we need to be concerned about that, because I've walked this area and it is really in very, very bad shape. Another reason why I'm very pleased that you're here. So is it possible that we would be faced with the Ontario Heritage Trust wanting to acquire tablelands?
I'll answer that through the chair. So I don't believe we would not be interested in acquiring tablelands as such. Really what we're trying to do is ensure the integrity of those tablelands. So that's part of the reason we have been in touch with the town is to ensure that there's some clarity in terms of what our plans are for work in that area, because we are interested in stabilizing that. And we have as well a staff archaeologist who's aware of some of the issues at the top of the tablelands in terms of the graveyards that are there, and so really all of this comes down to protecting the integrity of the slope, which also relates directly to the integrity of the tablelands.
Okay, thank you for that. And Mr. Chairman, my second question relates to this interruption in the relationship that occurred back around, I'm going to say 2018 or 2019, somewhere in there, certainly left everyone involved in quite an unstable situation. What are the anticipated impacts, Mr. Wicks, of not doing this work, financial or otherwise?
I would answer that through the chairs. So I think we recognize this is something that has sort of been ongoing for a couple of recent years. That's part of the reason we had studies done to look at this particular problem. And it kind of was around the time that we no longer had a steward for the property. So those things sort of happened at a similar time. And so for us, it's really important in terms of the natural heritage values of the property, but also obviously safety is a concern, and the integrity of the slope itself is a concern. And I think there's a recognition that this is an important step to take in order to look at those other improvements to the property that we have also been touching on at tonight's discussion and presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, your longevity may have overlapped into a time when the McGlone report was carried out, I believe, under the direction of the town. I don't know whether Mr. Wicks has come across that or not, but it was hydrogeological study that was done, I think, in about 2014. So that definitely would be in your tenure. And so I'm looking at the agenda to see where this report, if this report comes up again, or if we're just going to receive it. And I'd like to suggest that through you, Mr. Chairman, to the clerk or possibly to staff, that the Town of Lincoln Council discuss the implications of this work in terms of how we ought to be involved in the future. So I don't know whether, Mr. Chairman, you would consider that question going over to Mr. Kirkopoulos, but I'll leave it to you to direct.
Well, and fancy that, Your Worship, Mr. Kirkopoulos has his hand up. So I'm going to go to him before I go to Council McPherson, if that's okay. So Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think one of the comments I wanted to make, but first let me address Mary Easton's comment. I mean, absolutely something staff can take away and look at. I did want to suggest that when the NPCA was going through a lot of their tumultuous times, to say the least, and some challenges, I think that's where that relationship really fell apart. I'd suggest maybe staff, and I see Shannon nodding, endeavor to have that conversation again with the NPCA and determine isn't there an ability to have that stewardship relationship. And I see Thomas also nodding. So I'm hoping collectively we can maybe come to the table, re-engage the NPCA and maybe have some of those stewardship type conversations, because I think there's definitely more of a willingness with the leadership there to do that. But definitely, I think to the mayor's question and comment, staff can take that away.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm finished.
You're welcome, Your Worship. Thanks, Mike, for the clarification. Council McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Thomas, for the presentation. And first of all, a comment. I would definitely support Councillor Mikulic's request to have a look at that trail leading out to the Jordan Park. You know, I think that would tie the whole area in so nicely for people that are going to be visiting the Jordan area for the museum or for, you know, the wineries, or for whatever reason, that if we can tie that Jordan Park all the way through to where the Bailey Bridge is and then up to the museum, it just makes so much sense and gives people another reason to come see us, or for our own residents to enjoy a nice walk on a day like today. My question, Thomas, is with regards to the staircase. So is it safe for me to assume that staircase opening is another project, that it's not necessarily the stabilization, that once stabilization is done, we can't just open up the staircase? Can you maybe speak to that? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll answer that through the chair. So that is correct. The focus of this project is the stabilization, and the hope would be that we could obtain funding and move ahead with implementing improvements to the site in terms of the staircase down into the valley, and that would be a future project, building on some of the stuff that we were able to accomplish with this particular project. So I guess we're doing this in sort of reasonable chunks, and this is the first sort of step that we're taking in that direction, and then that's something we would like to explore for the future.
Okay. You know, maybe it's something we also add to that list of things that we would talk about internally, is you know, ways to possibly get that staircase, you know, opened as quickly as we can, because I think it's a key part of the whole site and people's enjoyment, and of course being safe. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Councilor McPherson. Councilor Mikulic.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask another question. The question I'm asking is through you, Chair. It dovetails a little bit to Mary Easton's comments about stewardship and maintenance and this sort of thing and responsibility. So, and I asked this question just as a question, like, so my kids bought me a metal detector, I wouldn't mind going metal detecting. Who would I contact? How would I would have to seek permission. Who would I contact? Is this something that you would contact the town, the NPCA, the Ontario Heritage Trust? Who would I contact if I wanted to go metal detecting on this Ellis property in search for possible buried treasures?
I'll answer that.
Thomas, that's all yours.
I will say it's not something we typically would encourage on any of our properties. And I would say that because we are essentially we're in the role of both owner and steward, that is a question that would be asked really to us. It's not something we allow, particularly if there's a potential for archaeology, because of course there are known archaeological sites there, and that could also mean that there's further potential. So it really doesn't sort of align with how we would want to manage the property. It's sort of one of those activities that we just wouldn't really encourage as part of the conservation of the overall site. It's not specific to this property per se, but it is something more generally that we do have to address occasionally, and it can be a challenge at times, but it's just not something that we typically would endorse.
Appreciate that. I'll stick to the dugouts at town owned property. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Michalak, our modern day Indiana Jones. So there being no further questions for the delegation, I've got a motion moved by Councillor Russell. The council receive and file as information the following presentation and delegation. Thomas Wicks, Manager, Acquisitions and Conservation Services, Ontario Heritage Trust, regarding the Ellis Property Slope Stabilization Project. I will now ask our clerk, or Deputy Clerk Devane, to call out the vote.
Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timbers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Support.
and that carries.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Wicks, for your presentation. Nice to meet you, and I'm sure our paths will cross as this project continues. So thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Our second delegation tonight is Robert Salowich, Program Manager, Transit Services, Niagara Region, regarding the Niagara Region On-Demand Pilot Program update. Once we've received this, delegation committee will transition directly into report PW 12-21, item 6.3.1. Please note that each delegation has 5 minutes. However, due to the information, the presentation is approximately 15 minutes. So prior to proceeding, I will ask the council proceed with a majority vote to extend the speaking time for Mr. Salowich. I've got a motion moved by Councillor Rajima. The council extends the speaking time for the delegation from Robert Salowich, Program Manager, Transit Services, Niagara Region, until the presentation is completed. I'll now ask our Deputy Clerk to call out the question.
Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Support.
and that carries.
Thank you very much, Devane. Mr. Salowich, welcome. Fantastic news report. The on demand has been, taken up by our residents at a feverish pitch. So please indulge us with your report. Very good news.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair, and to the committee for having me. I certainly do appreciate the little extension as well. I know I had a little bit of panic in my mind when I heard 5 minutes, and I thought, how am I possibly going to get this down to 5 minutes of time? But clearly you thought of that ahead of time, and I appreciate your the graciousness. It does say that, are you going to actually run the slides for me? I think we had set it up the other way, but I'm okay with just asking for a next slide if that's fine. Nope, looks like you've given me control. Okay, we've got it all worked out. Sorry for the confusion, everyone. We'll get there. It's Monday. Okay, so we'll give you a little bit of a background. I don't want to spend too much time on some of the early slides. They were definitely a bit of a rehashing of some of the old information that we had already given you, just trying to keep it all in one central location. By all means, at the end, if there's questions, I'm happy to go through anything that you feel like maybe didn't get enough attention. As you know, there's never quite enough time to go through everything. So we'll touch on some of the excitement and go from there. So as I mentioned, the background, these are all things that you've seen before. Services are happening in your municipality as well as in Pelham and Grimsby. Waynfleet and West Lincoln have a modified service, and since the launch of the NRT On Demand, we've now had a secondary service in Niagara-on-the-Lake as well. So this one is a bit of a recap as well, just talks about the service hours. The only thing that's a little bit different is that we've overlaid some of the ridership for the West Niagara service zone, just so you can get a sense of, where people are using it. And I think what the information that's on this slide will be come into context very nicely when we highlight some of the goals of the project again in a slide or two here. So this is just quickly, I know there's not, doesn't connect directly to your service area, but this is the area set up for Niagara-on-the-Lake. Very limited service area. So it does, cause a fair bit of challenges, but it at least was able to get them onto the service. And so far, that's been a really great change as well. So focusing on your area, and as I mentioned, with the map and the overlay showing the ridership being really all over your municipality, it really does go to highlight the success of this goal in the middle, which was to maximize coverage areas and access for everyone with increased connectivity. So I think that certainly goes a long way into showing that. In terms of number of rides, so since the middle of August, and this is as of the end of last month, so there's a 2-week, maybe 3-week period where we don't have the updated data. Well, we do, but we didn't have it in time for this presentation. And you can see that we are now, I'm sure we're up over 12,000 trips, but at the time we were at 11,000, almost 600 rides that were taken. A really good blend between intermunicipal and intramunicipal. And that's given the fact that 2 of the 5 municipalities that started on the service don't have access to any intramunicipal service. So I think it's important to see that regardless of how you split it up, clearly people across Niagara are accessing services across Niagara. And as much as we sometimes get a little bit parochial, I think in our own hometowns and that sort of thing, it's important to recognize that clearly there are needs that are being met here. When we look specifically at the intra-municipal rides, so just those rides that are happening within the same municipality, clearly Grimsby is doing the bulk of those, but Lincoln is second on the list with Pelham, and then Niagara-on-the-Lake, again, they're going to be a lot smaller, having started, a 3 or so 4 full months after the Niagara West portion started. This slide we put together, I think this is something that everybody knows or expects, but we thought the visualization here was nice. You can clearly see right from the start of the service that ridership was building. We had some very quick uptake right away as things in November and people started to get a little bit wary of what was coming in terms of restrictions from the province. We heard yellow was coming. That slowed the growth a little bit. Then orange was coming. Again, you can see that we still grew overall in orange, which was really, really inspiring for us. And then when red hit and then gray lockdown hit, you can just see the total collapse in terms of that growth. What I will also point out, though, is it didn't completely collapse ridership. So you can see here, whether it's residents accessing services, whether it's those who are providing essential services, even while we still had a provincial stay-at-home order, we really only reverted back to sort of that, I don't know what to say, October, November-ish ridership range. So we're very, very hopeful that as things start to come out the other end once vaccinations start reaching larger demographic groups, we really are hoping to see those numbers start to return to what we saw pre-lockdown numbers. So specific to Lincoln, with 3,400, almost 3,500 rides that have taken place, that's quite a bit. I know it's sometimes tough, maybe without some context, and we can pull some of that in here for you later. But really, this is just, again, to show you much of what you saw in the last couple of slides, just good, solid growth. Definitely has some variability in terms of week to week and day to day. And then the time of the day. So while the service is still running until 9 o'clock or so, you can see that there is that bit of a cutoff. And I think actually what we're finding is that you can get a ride right up until about 5 to 10 or so. And even if that ride would drop you off at 10:30 or 10:40 and the service ends at 10, we're still completing those rides. So that little drop off is a bit misleading in the sense that it doesn't really quite drop off at 10. It's just that the number of trips that we're still delivering, nobody's getting picked up after that 10 o'clock piece. So it looks like there's a really quite a large drop off, but that just isn't the case. Which just speaks to, we think we have a pretty good start on our hours per day. Certainly we're up to, or any sort of discussion to see if that needs to be altered at all, but we think it's a pretty good start. When we look maybe a little more specifically, on the left is those trips that are happening entirely within Lincoln. So it gives you a bit of a sense. And again, I think really does iterate the fact that our other plans that Niagara Region had to provide a fixed route service really wasn't going to provide the type of coverage that the residents of Lincoln need. And that's just because they don't all work and live on a straight line. And that's unfortunately the limitation of the fixed route service. So on the right-hand side, you do have where your residents or where residents of Niagara are both going to and coming from when Lincoln is their origin. And you can see a lot of movement to Grimsby, a fair amount to West Lincoln in the Smithville area. Definitely people going into St. Catharines. I don't think that's too much of a surprise for anybody. And a good chunk of people moving in towards Pelham as well. So really, I'm a little bit surprised to see as many that there are movement down into the Port Colborne and Waynflete area, but I think those are just circumstances. People are finding out that there is a service that can meet the needs that they have that they probably didn't otherwise have, and we'll likely only see more of those trips as time goes on. So what are we hearing from customers? Overwhelmingly, it has been positive. We have our trip ratings there. We are, as you can see, those are not doctored numbers. It's overwhelmingly 5-star. We definitely get the one-off type of, complaints or situations. The vehicle didn't come get me, or I called in and I waited a long time. All of these different pieces. And yet when we check the data, those really are outliers. So unless you're hearing something drastically different than what we're hearing, overwhelmingly things are going very well for people. That's not to say that we can't make improvements and do things better in certain areas, but overwhelmingly we're quite positive and quite happy with the way things that are going. And sometimes it's just items of clarity. So for example, we hear a lot that drivers are not wearing masks, but drivers are not required to wear masks based on the regional bylaw and because of the partition that they have separating them. So the driver isn't required, but the rider is. A lot of drivers will, just out of, for their own personal safety or peace of mind. And sometimes that gets confusing for the riders too, right? When you see one driver wearing them and one driver not, it can be a little bit challenging. This we put in here just to try and give a sense of transition. So leading up to the deployment of the NRT on-demand service, you can see we have a number of months there taken from the ULink service, taken right out of the reported provincial data. And I think, maybe if we just look at sort of the average of any kind of given month, there really isn't any months that ULink was operating in 2019, so prior to the pandemic entirely, where as many trips were being delivered for Lincoln residents as we have with NRT on demand. So I know the service wasn't running right before, so we can't get any month to month. We can't get the June, July, August portions of Ulink, but I think this slide says it all. The one on the top is a fixed route service, no pandemic, and the second one is an on-demand service in the midst of a full-blown pandemic, and we still are seeing ridership that's high. And obviously, I think everybody in the room and on the call wants to see that go higher. So we're happy to champion our successes, but we're not done. This one I'll just touch on really quickly. It was in a lot of the other presentations that you likely all have seen. It's just a reminder that a lot of the things that we're testing in this service are recommendations that had come out of the region's previous specialized transit study. And the reason why we just like to mention it is sometimes you get requests for the opposite thing. So for same-day booking, for example, that's what this service does, provides on-demand, same-day booking. When you need to go, you just make a call and the service can facilitate your trip. That said, we've had some other requests from people who feel like they would benefit from the ability to pre-book services. So we're currently looking into that option as well. But again, the same-day booking was something that we are offering based off of requests that we had heard from similar services elsewhere. As you're probably aware, we've been attempting to do as much community engagement as possible. Presentations to committees such as this, joint accessibility committees. We've been out to the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce in their business after 5, had presentations with food banks, employment centers, basically all over, just trying to get the word out that the service is there and that we want to be actively involved in trying to make sure that your clients are using the service. We understand that while we are in the business of getting people around, there are a lot more people in the community at a variety of agencies that have a lot more intimate understanding of the needs of those residents. And we're trying to leverage that expertise to telling us what can be done better. So it's calls with Pelham Cares and the Employment Help Center and all these different groups to try and make sure that we're getting there. And so why are we talking about a pilot renewal? I know it feels like yesterday I was there, I was talking, promising the world and saying what we can do with this service if we just give it a shot. And now I think we're, 6-7 months in and we're already talking renewal. And I think a lot of it comes down to, there's a pandemic and we all knew we launched a service in that. So this was a really great opportunity to find out how it's functioning in those restrictions. But I do think we want to know how this type of service can function when those restrictions are gone. And so I think renewing gives a great opportunity to do that. But also it's a timing thing. So even for the region, if we had decided that this wasn't working for us, even after 6 months, we know that's the case, and we want to go out to an RFP and try something different, you're looking at a minimum sort of 6 months to get that process going. So we went to our council in January and started working with the Intermunicipal Transit Working Group to make sure we could get a time to come out and talk to you and go to Grimsby and with our other partners as well, because you're going to need an equal amount of time if you need to change service providers, if this isn't going the way you would want it, any of those sort of things. It feels early, but that's because there's a lot of time required in order to pivot and get some other sort of service going. So we already have the terms to renew. We planned for this eventuality in our memorandum of understanding between the town and the region. The region's agreement with VIA originally had a 1 year with an option to renew for a second year. So we provided for this already. The terms haven't been worked out yet, but my understanding is it's essentially exactly the same. So no change in dollars or cost splitting, no changes to the hours of the day and that sort of thing, or the types of vehicles. Really, this was an attempt to try and get out and get a second year worth of data before any sort of governance piece gets resolved in the meantime. There's a lot of moving pieces, and we thought maybe switching to a new provider so quickly really wasn't going to be in anybody's best interest. But in order to decide to renew, it's important to know that there are some alternative things coming for you as well, which one is the Winona Crossing Shopping Center. This one is coming so soon. I have been working diligently trying to get a date. there is a draft agreement that we have, and we're working with our partners at Hamilton Street Railway and the city of Hamilton and the property owner there at the Costco as well. So we're really hopeful to get this going as another connection for people. There are some different municipalities which have made some intentions at least somewhat clear. A few weeks ago, Port Colborne passed a motion that they want an NRT on-demand service area in their municipality. So we'll be working with them to try and expand at some point in time. And the last one I want to mention there is the pre-booking of trips. So I touched on it earlier. This is an on-demand service. It works on demand when you need it, but we've certainly heard that there are some demographics that are better served by having a pre-booking service. And so we're actually looking with our service provider at blending their two algorithms into one. And that really our issue right now, it seems, I think at face value, really easy. Yes, on demand is great. Pre-booking is great. You put them both together, it sounds amazing. But there are some trade-offs. So that's why it hasn't been implemented yet. But we're pretty positive in terms of our ability to roll that out in the near future, if in fact our partners decide that they would like to renew with us. So, again, I'm not sure where we are in the time, but I do appreciate everybody's patience and the opportunity to speak. I know I've been making this a bit of a regular occurrence at your committee meetings, and I certainly do appreciate, as always, the opportunity to represent the region in this program.
Robert, thank you very much. You were well within your time limit, and you're an old pro at this, so you don't need to look at script and you know what you're talking about, and the passion comes through. So any questions from committee? Councillor Russell, I see you first up, so go ahead, lead us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Salowich. Great presentation. Again, I thought the overall, the commentary we're receiving, the numbers are all very, very positive. When you compare that to the value of the cost that we are contributing, again, I think it's great value for our residents. And again, compared to our previous fixed route mode, again, you see a much larger uptake in the service. So I think that's great. One thing I just wanted to clarify, and it was something that Mr. Robinson had in his presentation from a couple of weeks ago, and I just did some looking deeper dive on your numbers, and they do definitely overlap. So on one of his slides, again, he talked about, again, something just over 1650 Lincoln rides, where either a person was picked up in Lincoln or dropped off in Lincoln. And again, I looked at your numbers, and for the first 4 months, including August, it was about 1660. So again, I'm pretty sure those are the same numbers that you guys were using. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Chair. Everything that we've given out tends to be cumulative up until that point. And so I'm not sure what Mr. Robinson had in terms of his end date for his data, but ours is certainly up until the end of last month.
Yeah, no, he just mentioned the first 4 months there was a little bit over 1650. So, and it definitely corresponds with the numbers that you provided. So, but my question was the commentary he provided with that statistic was that it's either they were picked up in Lincoln or dropped off in Lincoln, and that's what made up that 1660. Can you give any commentary on that? Is that realistic?
Absolutely, through you, Chair. That the current number as of the end of last month was 3472. So that 1660 that he had given was likely something up until our November numbers or something. But that 1660 is very likely transferring into the 3472. We had quite a bit of ridership in November and December up until obviously the provincial restrictions began to hit. But we tend to give our numbers in terms of the total. So it'll be both his 1660 would have counted both local trips only and local trips that connected to Lincoln, at least in one half of those trips.
Okay, so thank you. And Mr. Chair, just my last follow-up. It was that last point that gave me a little bit concerned. So if somebody's picked up in Grimsby and dropped off in Lincoln, that's one ride, but it technically would count as one for Grimsby and one for Lincoln, according to what you just said, and according to what Mr. Robinson said.
Through you, Chair. So I appreciate, I now understand what you're saying. So Our rides numbers aren't being double counted in terms of totals. However, yes, when you look at intermunicipal trips, there will be some overlap where it gets counted twice. And unfortunately, we actually took it out of this presentation, but I think it's in the documentation that is sent out monthly to give you the update ridership. That phenomenon that you're referring to is illustrated in one of the tables where it actually breaks down our intermunicipal and the intramunicipal portions of the trips. If you were to add up all those totals, you can see clearly that it's well over the total numbers of trips. And that's what it was us trying to do, is show that while we're counting that as a Grimsby trip, yes, we're also counting that as a Lincoln trip as well, in terms of intermunicipal, but not in terms of total rides. So we're not really double counting when we're getting to our, total rides of how the service is doing. It's not being included like that, only a single one of them in terms of a ride.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Devane, where am I going next? Is it Councillor Timmers? Am I going left to right on my
That's right.
screen
You
at the
got
top?
it. Councillor
Okay.
Timmers is up next.
Councillor Timmers, you are up.
Thank you very much, Chair Patriga, through to our presenter tonight. Thank you very much for being here tonight, Rob. I was looking at the local engagement. I was really pleased to see that there's a lot of engagement happening with some of the local organizations and groups. I still keep hearing every now and then people who will say, I have no idea what that is. What is it? So, it's early days. So I see that, eventually everyone will learn about it and start using it. From early days of Ulink to this is just fantastic. I've always been a big supporter. I guess my question to you would be, we're seeing some great numbers, lots of users, lots of rides happening during a pandemic. Once, things open up more down the road, what about the fleet? Are we going to have enough, are there going to be enough vehicles to service all of the municipalities that are now using, or will the fleet need to be increased so the time waiting for a ride isn't, extended really long?
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. So if anybody recalls back to one of my earliest presentations, we talked about this exact situation. And, when we were looking at other examples such as Innisfil and their Uber model, and they continually had to put more and more money into the program every year to meet this, meet the demand. We talked about how in our situation, we planned for the number of vehicles to hit basically the low up to the medium levels of demand, which we're not anywhere near as of yet because of the pandemic. So the way we design the service, we think there is still plenty of room, service capacity before we get into those types of discussions. It will be at those times when we finally hit that demand that we talk about the details of the service parameters, and should we be manipulating those, or should we be putting extra vehicles on the road? So just for clarity, when I talked about Niagara-on-the-Lake, they came with their own vehicles. We brought new vehicles into the system, so they're not coming out of your total. When we talk about Port Colborne and wanting to add a service area for them, new vehicles will be brought in to supplement that area as well. So it's not like we're diluting the pool of vehicles that are available, but at some point, I think it would be a good problem to have where we have to start talking about, are we providing enough vehicles to keep the service levels where we want? But right now we're nowhere near that conversation.
Well, that's great. It's good to hear that. And I was a little concerned about, the number of vehicles and spreading them too thin, but it sounds like we've got lots of room with lots of growth there. So thank you very much.
Councillor Renchima.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Salowich, for your presentation. Definitely, you were speaking earlier on about the future, and Councillor Timmers was just asking about the future, and we've set the bar high here in terms of service. And that's a good problem to have, and we're very fortunate to have this. It's great. So my question is about, I know you when you presented to the chamber, you let us know that there's an opportunity for local businesses or facilities to sell passes and make it even more accessible for people. So I know there's one local business, and that's the Jacobs in Lincoln Square, the seniors assisted living facility. And in speaking with Candace there, she's interested in hearing more about that. So what would somebody need to know if they wanted to sell the passes?
Through you, Chair, thank you for that question. I think this is something that we're still trying to actively work through. It works really simply when it's selling passes at municipal facilities and that sort of thing. When we get into private businesses, we then require agreements and that sort of thing. And so we have a draft from another municipality in terms of fair products being sold at commercial retail businesses that we're going to review, and hopefully we can put that into play. I would encourage any business or agency or otherwise that was interested in having that discussion to certainly reach out to me at the region, and we can include you in those discussions. Basically, we want to make it as easy as possible for people to access the service, and providing a wider range of locations for people to access those paper tickets is certainly one of those next phase topics that we have on the go. But we're happy to hear from anybody that is interested, and we will try and accommodate. We're looking at a few different ways right now, whether it's, we just act as a flow through, or whether that agency buys a couple of tickets and then just does a reimbursement or reconciliation at the end. I think from our perspective, we're open to having those conversations and trying to find what works for, each municipality and each organization on its own, because different sizes have different capabilities to do those sorts of things.
Thank you. Yeah, and I can see that those kinds of conversations that you have will feed into the whole process in the long run. You'll figure out who's really interested, and that'll help you decide on how to facilitate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Councillor McCulloch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure, was I next or? All right, I'll go ahead. Dovetailing a little bit on Councillor Timmers. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much, Rob, for coming out tonight, your presentation. How does NRT On Demand or the region promote? Is there a budget for promotion of this service to the residents? Whose responsibility is it falling under to promote this service? Should we, as a municipality, be promoting it more? Should the region be promoting it more? I understand that you're showing up at various events and trying to make the service known to the public, but should there be more of an effort to promote it, in terms of newspaper, literature, social media, that sort of thing?
Through you, Chair. So I think the short answer is it never hurts to provide additional promotional opportunities. And if the town has specific things they would like to do, or other avenues that they feel need to be pursued, we are certainly happy to do that. Ultimately, I would say the responsibility falls on the region. It's a regional branded service. Certainly, we've all partnered, but even with our service provider, VIA, ultimately, it all comes down to our communications program and what we're putting into play. So we had plans to go out into the communities and do, things like all sorts of different community events, and it didn't really happen that way. As everybody knows, with the pandemic, there wasn't quite the same opportunities to get out, but we put things out in the newspaper. They've gone out in social media. We've reached out through the different agencies and employers. We've reached out through the high schools to make sure that the students know, and that the students that are using it for the co-op programs know. So we are more than happy to keep doing more. And if the town, like I said, has things that they would like to do, we are certainly open to those opportunities. We feel like we have done a lot to get the word out there, but I certainly do hear situations as well when I say, why don't you just take NRT On Demand? And the resident says, what's that? So clearly we're not getting to everybody, but that is a challenging thing for, I think, any municipality to do, regardless of what service it's providing.
And Councillor Mikulak, thanks, Rob, for that. Ms. Bisnello's got her hand up, so I'm going to let her jump in. Maybe she's got some more clarity to your question on what we're going to do from our end. So Liliana, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to Councillor Mikulak. To answer your question about promotions, we're always looking for opportunities to raise awareness about these great programs, and we'll look. We've got lots of opportunities to share the information that's coming through the region, but also using our own platforms, through advertisements on our social media channels, and working again with the region to get the word out and through a whole mix of platforms that we've got. And I'll speak to this later on this evening, but we've got a new engagement platform called Speak Up Lincoln. That's a great opportunity to share information and get feedback from the community as well on how they're finding the service. So we'll keep looking for opportunities to leverage awareness in the community for this great program.
Thanks, Lily.
Thank you very much. I think it's a fabulous service. I think people need to know about it. I think within our budget with ULink, there was a certain amount of funds that were directed towards promotion of the service. And I'm just following up on that's being done at the regional level, as I'm not sure if even restaurants are aware that patrons can be offered a ride home on ULink should they have too much to drink. So I just want to make sure that we're letting people know. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, if I can just add, the region does have a communications program and a strategy that we're working through that does have a number of these pieces. Unfortunately, our sort of phase 2, as we want to call it, we haven't quite finished that. And so I don't really have the update that maybe would give you a little more comfort in that, but I can tell you there are other things that are happening. We're making a video to try and explain the service as well that focuses on the different types of rider profile. So there being sort of a youth, a senior profile, and then kind of a managing supervisor, parents of both age groups in the middle profile as well. And that I think will help us connect as we start to reach out to some of the larger business community. As I said, we had a meeting with the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce just a week ago, maybe it was 10 days ago. And the Grimsby Chamber has reached out as well. So I think all of these things are happening in time. And as much as I would like to shout from the rooftops to make sure everybody knows the service is there, when I think back to the Niagara Region Transit, and I think that was an extenuating circumstance, but it took multiple years for that service to really catch on. And I think we've already seen growth that trumps any sort of growth that we saw early on a decade ago when we started Niagara Region Transit.
Thanks, Rob. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Rob, for coming again tonight. Good to see you, and it's always good to see you when you've got great numbers, and you certainly have that. And I would not cut yourself short on the trends that are happening from January through the end of February that you're showing there. That I think we're trending very nicely in the gray area as well. And it kind of leads one other comment on promo. And I was very pleased to see in the report that you do plan a promotion again this spring. I think the timing couldn't be better to get back out there and push the on-demand system as we hopefully are moving into less restricted times. So yeah, whatever we can do to help out there. A couple of nice billboards here in Lincoln would look very sharp with the on-demand van on them and the logo, but we'll leave that to you. My question, Rob, is through you, Mr. Chair, is kind of going down the road of Councillor Timmer's question about added vehicles. And I wonder if pickup times are tracked. You've got an app that you use that people are using to reserve the cars. I guess it's also call in to reserve the cars. And I'm wondering if you're actually tracking those times and if you can report those times, and if you do, does that allow you to then see when do we need to add a vehicle? And that could be adding a vehicle during the day for the busy period of the day, or that could be adding a vehicle when the numbers are just getting to a point where we need an additional vehicle. So back to my question, are you tracking pickup times?
Through you, Chair. Yes. So we do track pickup times. Not only that, but so with our service, when we set it up, we put a maximum pickup time of 1 hour on the service. And we're seeing, unfortunately, I don't have the statistic right here with me, and I apologize for that. But we're seeing much more down in the 20-minute average pickup time range. So that alone shows that we have quite a bit of capacity in the service. The question will become, though, what do we do as those numbers start to creep up? And I mean, I'm with you in the same way. I think the reason why we set this up this way is so that we have options besides just putting more money up front. You know, we can let the pickup time get longer if that's a better value for the money. But maybe it's not. But we wanted to set that up, and we will bring those types of conversations back to this group as well when, you know, I guess a year from now, when we start to look at the end of that 2 years, assuming we get a renewal, what do we do for that? And we'll start to look at all those parameters and compare them from one service to the next, which this serves as a really good segue. I won't take long in mentioning it, but there is a group called Open Transit. They're basically a not-for-profit, and they are doing a comparison of on-demand services and how they're running. And so we've reached out to them. They've actually sent us a draft of their review, and we're going to stay involved with them, but we're going to use their report as well to compare with ours. And that'll help us find out things like, are we getting good value for the dollar? You know, are our wait times comparable to other municipalities and other services that are similar? You know, in case you haven't heard, we were quick off the gun for on demand, but lots of other municipalities now are catching on and trying one version or another. And that's what we want to do, is take all this shared data and try and make sure, just like they are, that we're all getting good value for the dollar at that point in time.
So through you, Mr. Sheriff, so good to hear, Rob, that those numbers are being tracked. It would be nice to see those numbers in your report. I commend you on your dashboard report. It is excellent. And you know, I was very pleased to see you include the number of passes that are being used by the riders, so we can see how many monthly passes are being used, how many of the various levels of passes are being used, to see what kind of uptake you're getting on those. So if you could add those average pickup times to that dashboard, that'd be fabulous. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Did I by mistake? Thanks, Councilor McPherson. Rob, thank you very much. You know, the numbers speak for itself. Councilor Brunet and I were, established the Active Transportation Committee last term of council, and getting our citizens moving was part and parcel of it. And we started with the fixed route, the U-Link, and just a general metamorphosis is into the on-demand. And you can see that, the ridership is 3 to 4 times what that fixed link was, and it's just it's just a change where you need to start somewhere, and then you need to change. One of my neighbors, every time I see him out, speaks the praises of it. Rather than get another vehicle, he's able to get his daughter picked up from work, dropped off. I'm going to tell him he's creating a little hub there along the service road at Hendricks Greenhouses. But it behooves us to also sing the praises and chat up on demand through our ward meetings, through our newsletters. I talked to Director Graham, Rob, about maybe getting some of that Lincoln, what's the word? Platitudes for you, like us doing a little survey here and asking our riders, what do you think? And then providing you that information, and let's really make this a partnership and make it as best as it can be. And we're heading in the right direction. got to remember that this is in the middle of a pandemic. So a lot of your advertising that you were going to do in the arenas and all of that's probably been interrupted because the arenas haven't been open. So parents milling around, reading stuff and it's still taken off in spite of all that. So onward and upward. One of the old friends we used to have always said, so that reminds me of you. So thank you very much. There being no further questions for the delegation, this concludes the portion of the agenda, and I've got a motion moved by Councillor Bernay. The council receive and file as information the following presentation and delegation from Robert Salowich, Program Manager, Transit Services, Niagara Region, regarding Niagara Region On-Demand Pilot Program update. I'll now ask our Deputy Clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that carries, Chair.
Very good. Thanks again, Rob. So we're now considering item 6.3.1, report PW 12-21, Niagara Region Transit On-Demand Pilot Extension. Do any members of council have any questions or comments? Okay, I see none. So we've got a motion moved by Councillor Renjima to receive and file report PW 12-21, Niagara Region Transit On-Demand Pilot Extension, and approve extending the Niagara Region Transit On-Demand Pilot Service for an additional year as per the provisions outlined in the existing service agreement between the Niagara Region and the town of Lincoln. I'll now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that carries, Chair.
Thank you very much, Devane. So that concludes our delegations this evening. So we're going to move into 6.2 consent agenda. We're now considering the consent agenda, which is inclusive of item 6.2.1, municipal sidewalks, winter maintenance level of service review, 6.2.2, age-friendly citizen advisory committee minutes of January 7th, 2021, and 6.2.3, age-friendly citizen advisory committee minutes of February 4th, 2021. Would any members like to remove these from the consent agenda? Okay, I don't see any. So there being no further discussion, I've got a motion moved by Councillor McPherson. That council receive and file for information item 6.2 of the consent agenda, inclusive of item 6.2.1, municipal sidewalks, winter maintenance level of service review, item 6.2.2, age-friendly citizen advisory committee minutes of January 7th, 2021, item 6.2.3, age-friendly citizen advisory committee minutes of February 4th, 2021. And before I ask our deputy clerk to call the question, I see Mr. Garkopoulos with his hand up. So go ahead, Mr. CAO.
Mr. Chair, and I do apologize. I didn't want to delay the vote. However, I just wanted to highlight that one of the next steps in our memo that was highlighted around sidewalk and winter maintenance is to develop an internal working group, both with representatives from internal staff, but also our citizen advisory committees. And I know that was something a number of members of council did highlight as an important step. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will let council go back to their vote.
You are welcome, Mr. CAO. You are not remiss. So, Deputy Clerk, can you call
Thank you,
that
Chair.
question?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva,
Yes.
Counselor Reimer,
Yes.
Counselor Rajima,
Yes.
Counselor Russell,
Yes.
Counselor Chimmers,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that carries, Chair.
Thank you very much, Devane. So we're going to move on in our agenda, 6.3 reports. So we will now consider item 6.3.2, report PW 05-21, corporate climate adaptation plan milestone, number 4 update. Our climate change coordinator, Shannon Fernandez, and our manager of environmental services, Jillian Harris, will be providing an overview for us. Presentation is approximately 15 minutes. Prior to proceeding with the presentation, I will ask the council proceed with a majority vote to extend the speaking time. I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer. The council extend the presentation time until completed. I'll now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Counselor Brunei,
Yes.
Counselor McPherson,
Yes.
Counselor Micklick,
Yes.
Counselor Pachariva,
Yes.
Counselor Reimer,
Yes.
Counselor Rajima,
Yes.
Counselor Russell,
Yes.
Counselor Chimmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Support.
and that carries, Chair.
Thank you very much, Devane. Welcome, Jillian and Shannon. The floor is yours. Please let us know our Q4 update with respect to climatic change and adaptation.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Chair and members of Council, and thank you. I'm excited to provide an update tonight on Lincoln's Climate Adaptation Plan and present it to you. I will review the climate science, the planning process, and then present the goals, actions, and preliminary implementation schedule. Next slide, please. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge that the Climate Adaptation Plan was developed with the support and funding provided by Infrastructure Canada through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Municipalities for Climate Innovation Program. This plan was a collaboration between Council, Niagara Adapts, municipal staff, members of the Adaptation Steering Committee, and many community stakeholders. And I would like to thank all the contributors for their time, expertise, and ongoing support. Next slide, please. The adaptation planning process was based on FCM's climate adaptation framework, where phase 1 is to develop an adaptation plan before moving into operational and institutional changes, and then into preparing for implementation of climate adaptation initiatives. Next slide, please. This is an overview of phase 1, the adaptation planning process. First, we looked at the scientific projections to understand what climate changes we can expect. Then we looked at the areas of the town that were vulnerable and at risk to those impacts. We identified actions to mitigate the negative consequences and created an implementation schedule to outline who is responsible for the actions and how they will be implemented. Lastly, we developed a set of indicators to monitor and evaluate the success of the plan's implementation and ensure continuous improvement. Next slide, please. To begin with, the science says that climate change is already occurring and that we are past the point of being able to mitigate all impacts. Thus, we have to plan to adapt to projected impacts while working to mitigate even more climate change. Canada is warming at about double the global rate, and in southern Ontario, we can expect more precipitation that falls as rain, less precipitation in the summer, warmer temperatures all year round, and increased frequency and severity of severe heat storms and wind events. We are certain of uncertainty, and thus the municipalities in the Niagara region have undertaken adaptation planning for the worst case scenario. Next slide, please. In collaboration with Niagara Adapts and the federal climatedata.ca database, in the next 80 years, Lincoln can expect, for example, 91 extreme hot days each year, more frequent and severe droughts, more extreme weather events, and milder winter temperatures, all of which will have an impact on the town. Next slide. From there, we evaluated how the town is vulnerable and at risk to these projections. Vulnerability is the susceptibility of Lincoln's assets, services, staff, etc., to harm arising from climate change impacts, while risk is a combination of how likely an impact is to occur and how severe the environmental, social, and financial consequences would be. This produced an overall priority. In red, we have the high-risk impacts that Lincoln is very vulnerable to and will be acted upon and mitigated with reasonable increases in staff and financial resources outlined in this plan. However, it may not be necessary to take action against the very low-risk impacts that the town is already resilient to, such as those in green. Next slide, please. The Adaptation Steering Committee then identified a number of specific impacts or ways climate change could affect their department, and then calculated the risk and vulnerability of each impact. Around 60 statements were created and are the basis of the development of the plan. The plan's purpose is to prepare the town of Lincoln, next slide, please, to prepare the town of Lincoln to adapt to anticipated climate change and extreme weather, thereby minimizing the severity of the resulting impacts. In order to achieve this, the plan includes the following elements: a vision for the plan, identification of the potential climate change and extreme weather impacts, and the risk to the town's infrastructure, assets, operations, services, and shoreline, which we've already talked about, prioritized adaptation actions to reduce risk and vulnerability, and a detailed implementation plan, including estimated costs, funding sources, responsibilities, and a framework to monitor and evaluate progress. Ultimately, the plan is a high-level commitment to adaptation actions and the sufficient funding and staffing resources needed to execute the actions. Next slide, please. The vision for the plan is Council's priority to be intentional in building stronger community resilience and strengthen our community's response to a wide array of future changes while utilizing available resources to move towards a more sustainable future. Foundational to achieving this vision and the adaptation plan is our community-driven approach and progressive public policies. Next slide, please. In order to address those priority impacts, the ones in red, the Adaptation Steering Committee moved into action planning. We organized about 50 actions under 8 overarching goals. They outline high-level objectives and areas of focus that the climate adaptation plan addresses. Next slide, please. The first goal is to integrate climate change considerations into town strategies, plans, policies, procedures, and operations and services. This goal focuses on the internal organizational and policy actions the town can take. For example, creating a mitigation plan, establishing an environmental advisory committee, and declaring a climate emergency. Next slide. Goal 2 is to increase resiliency and adaptive capacity within economic development, community services, and parks and recreation. This goal includes actions we can take to support the community, such as expanding and improving Shop Lincoln and developing a business resilience toolkit. Next slide. Goal 3 is to protect natural resources, promote ecosystem services, and minimize environmental degradation. This includes conducting a natural assets inventory, reviewing and updating procedures on invasive species, and reviewing winter control practices. Next slide. Goal 4 is to mitigate harmful consequences of extreme weather and emergency events, and includes review of emergency policies and investigating the feasibility of stormwater management programs. Goal 5 seeks to mitigate health and safety risks to community members and staff, and includes developing residential flood and 72-hour emergency preparedness and recovery guides. Next. Goal 6 is to foster Lake Ontario shorelines through planning and management and protection. Actions include increasing communications and conducting an environmental assessment. Goal 7 seeks to consider climate change impacts in built infrastructure and asset management, and this will be achieved through actions such as reducing I&I, considering climate impacts in asset management, and in hazard and risk assessments. Next slide. Lastly, Goal 8 is to increase climate change literacy among staff and the public through actions such as reviewing internal and external communication processes related to climate change and extreme weather, communicating municipal initiatives, and advancing green infrastructure education. Next slide, please. In order to ensure that these actions are implemented successfully, the Climate Adaptation Plan includes an implementation schedule that outlines on a high level how these actions will be implemented. We designed the schedule to be flexible to allow for modifications in strategy, scope, resources, and delivery, and ensure there was accountability for every action. The implementation schedule will be further refined as each action progresses and based on individual action work plans. Individual work plans will be subject to council approval and budget considerations. Projects that require significant staffing or capital funding are included in the plan as feasibility studies, as the development of project-specific work plans will then build the capacity for successful delivery and implementation if the need arises. Next slide, please. Here's a snapshot of the implementation schedule for some of the Goal 1 actions. It's important to note that while many actions are labeled as immediate or short-term, such as initiating a corporate mitigation plan, these actions will result in long-term significant institutional changes. The climate adaptation plan is designed as a starting point for climate change action at the town. And through implementation, this plan will equip staff and empower the town with the means to include climate considerations across town activities and increase the overall resilience to climate change. Next slide, please. In terms of accountability, 49 indicators will be used to measure the progress and success of the climate adaptation plan and the action items. In order for the town to successfully implement and continuously improve the adaptation plan, it's also important that the following 4 key principles are met. First, financial and human resources. The plan identifies high-level indicators of staffing and financial resources required to implement given actions. And as implementation begins, it's anticipated that applicable funding and staffing requests will be made on a project-by-project basis. Second, internal and community education and training. It is important to build internal and community awareness of climate change in order to build capacity to take meaningful and sustainable climate action. Normalizing climate considerations, increasing climate literacy, and effectively communicating climate science will be key to the town's ability to prepare for and adapt to climate change. Third, strategic partnerships. The plan was developed through extensive community engagement and outreach, and with the expertise of key stakeholders, local subject matter experts, and academic researchers. We will continue to leverage existing community partnerships, for example, with the NPCA, Brock University, and the Niagara region, and form new partnerships to achieve shared goals, identify co-benefits, maximize resources, and build collective adaptive capacity. Fourth and lastly, governance. Moving from awareness and planning to implementation and continuous improvement requires committed leadership. While municipal government will lead the governance of this plan, it will take collaboration with residential, institutional, industrial, and commercial sectors focused on sustained and significant action to realize and prioritize the change that is needed. Due to the scale of climate action, it will take one or more champions across these sectors to keep adaptation initiatives alive in the face of many competing priorities. Next slide, please. Here are a few examples of evaluation indicators that will be used to determine the success of Goal 3. For example, the percentage of total tree canopy, the number of work orders to manage invasive species, and the number of green infrastructure and low-impact development installations. Sourcing and organizing the data to monitor and evaluate success and progress will take time. And after the first year of implementation, the indicators will be reviewed and modified if necessary to ensure efficacy. We are using this list as a starting point to ensure that we are kept accountable and can measure the meaningful impact the actions have on the town. The plan will also be reviewed annually to evaluate the success of action implementation. Next slide, please. The completion of the corporate climate adaptation plan completes phase 1 of the adaptation framework. Now the town will move into phases 2 and 3, making the operational and institutional changes and implementing climate adaptation initiatives. Next slide, please. This is a high-level roadmap of the next few major climate change action initiatives as they align to phase 1 in dark blue, phase 2 in green, and phase 3 in light blue. You can see that in the immediate future, we plan on laying the groundwork of declaring a climate emergency and implementing the very high priority items. This will move the town towards the development of a corporate climate mitigation plan and a low carbon resiliency plan, i.e. a combined adaptation and mitigation plan outlining the actions that the community can take. Also mapped is the formation of environmental committees, a sustainability advisory committee similar to H-Friendly or the Active Transportation Committee that will help transparent sustainability across Lincoln, and a corporate environmental committee, which is currently the Adaptation Steering Committee, to implement their department's adaptation actions and keep the interdepartmental collaboration momentum going as the town completes feasibility studies and investigates funding opportunities. Next slide, please. So that is a summary of the town's corporate climate adaptation plan. And I wanted to take a moment to thank you very much, not only for your time this evening, but your ongoing support throughout the plan's development. Please let me know what questions you may have. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Shannon, for the presentation. I've got Councillor Bernay up first.
Thank you, Chair Patrick. through you to Shannon. Shannon, thanks for the milestone update. It's great to see that you're keeping council updated as we move along. I'm really positive that we're doing this the right way, that we're engaging external stakeholders. We're following the FCM framework and our priorities as a council in terms of vision, in terms of resiliencies and the priorities we've set up. And I'm really pleased to see that we're partnering with organizations like Brock University. And certainly we're looking at this as a lens through public works and through development as we do the new subdivisions in terms of green infrastructure and low impact development. Those are all positives. But earlier today, council received an email from an organization called, let me see here, I'm just trying to find what the email was called, Climate Discussion Nexus. And this organization, which I believe is headed by Dr. John Robson, he talks about man-made global warming, and he talks about facts and fiction. And one of my takeaways through you, Chair, to Shannon or to Jillian was that, the real question that municipalities and cities should be asking is it true that cities are really facing more frequent serious floods due to climate change? Or in fact, is it due to poor water management? And, they really suggest that as communities, as cities and municipalities across Canada, that before we go off and start investing monies, that we make sure that we're spending the money in the right areas and we're solving the right problems, because for every dollar spent, going in an area that's really not causing the root of the problem is probably money not well spent. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe comment on that item that was in that email that we received today from this organization.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can address take the first shot at the question. So it's like, I would say that, so climate change is something that is impacting us and is having an overall impact to all of our infrastructure. The data continues to show that we're seeing more intense storms. Again, I've talked about this a number of times when discussing some of our I&I issues around town and other things along those lines. But we are seeing that, and that is continued to that projection does continue into the next 100 years as well. So I guess the more important thing to note is that when we look at our plan, and if you look at the action items that are coming out, it's not just, let's say that climate change, it's all climate change's fault. The plan is to adapt to it. So it's not only adapting to what the climate change has occurred, but also just making our overall infrastructure more resilient. So that also covers that other side that might be the argument that it's due to managing our water or that side of it. So the overall arching goal covers both of those possible sides, but all of the data as it's the historical plus going forward is showing that it is in fact more intense storms, how it's hitting and what the impacts are for that additional flooding. So that side, but and then on the flip side is that because it is intense storms, right? We're seeing that periods of the droughts as well. So we have to address not only the flood events, but then also the drought events. And so that's why it's a full encompassing and cohesive plan.
Okay, through you, Chair. Jillian, I appreciate that comment. I guess really one of the takeaways from me when I read that was really, water management. We here in Lincoln are now looking down the barrel of spending millions and millions and millions of dollars probably over a decade to repair our Lakeshore Road. And one could say, well, the reason for that is because lake levels were at an all-time high for a long period of time. But now when you talk to people, they're saying the lake levels have actually decreased, and really it's a mismanagement of the way the water is being handled and the way we're allowing it to come in. So I guess, I see you shaking your head, but I'm just looking at this and just saying, I think there's different ways of looking at what's happening. And I'm pleased to see that we're taking the time to look at this from proper lenses and engaging partnerships to look at this long term. So thank you for the update, and I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Councillor Bernay. Mr. Karkopoulos, you'd like to hop in?
I would actually, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, to pick up on Jillian's comment and where Councillor Bernay was going, and the mayor did share with me the Nexus email that I think that was received by members of council a little earlier today. And I think my comment would be, again, just in talking to some of our partners and our staff, that water really, and water resources and how we manage water is an essential part of the solution to climate change. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and I don't think that's what the councillor was suggesting. But I did want to highlight it because I think it's important, and where I'd probably kind of hone down a little bit or focus a little bit is probably on the wastewater management side. I know at the last CAO's meeting, we received a little bit of an update just on the importance of water management interventions. And if I think about us here in Lincoln, I think about things around, conservation and conserving some of our agricultural techniques. We talked about soil structure a lot when we were looking at Jordan Village. We were talking about low impact development. We're talking about just the type of matter we use when we're starting to do some of these developments. So I do think all of them are a part of it. I think on the wastewater management side, and that's really the presentation that we received, there's probably a lot of new technology that'll be coming forward, just kind of on organic matter and the decomposition of that organic matter. And so I think you're right, it isn't just about water levels. And I do think the two do dovetail with one another. So thanks for the comments.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Ms. Fernandez and Ms. Harris, or even possibly our CAO. Again, great report, very comprehensive. I love the overall strategies. I love the overall goals. Where I kind of got lost, and I think it's maybe just me being overly practical. When you start looking through the actions and the tactics, and I start looking at the resources that would be required in order to facilitate them being completed. And each one has dollar signs, some have multiple dollar signs, some have multiple resources. And I know that we are working with a very finite pool of resources. So I'm just wondering, is this a roadmap for us to achieve an end result? Or is this kind of I don't want to say a shopping list, but for lack of a better term, are we looking like an a la carte here that we can pick and choose some that might be more efficient with our dollars and our resources that we have available? Or I know there is mention of some external funding, grants and whatnot, and we will do everything we can to make sure we source those out. But how do we actually facilitate some of these tactics and actions to be completed within a fixed budget?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor, that's a great question. And there are two factors to consider when looking at this plan. One is the priorities. So each action item has been allocated a priority, whether that be low, medium, high, or very high. And related to that, the very high priorities are indicated to be in the immediate or short-term future. So those are a starting point for the climate adaptation plan, while the lower priority items we don't have to take immediate action towards those. And many of the lower, I should say, priority items are also more long-term actions that we can take to over time and over many budget seasons. In terms of the other factor is also in terms of funding that you'd mentioned. So many of the actions proposed, both immediate and in the long term, often fit well within existing departmental plans and budgets. as this list was put together by the steering committee made up of staff. However, when looking to fund those larger actions and the ones requiring more resources and staffing and financial resources, the plan is structured so that projects that require significant staffing or capital funding are included as feasibility studies. So as the development of the project-specific work plans occur, then you'll be able to identify, then they will be better able to identify the specific resources required. Other questions that will have to be asked when implementing those lower priority items are if there is external funding available, and then what is the life cycle cost of the action or project, and how does that compare to capital costs? Many adaptation initiatives, not only those identified in this town plan, but in many others as well, have a higher upfront capital cost, but provide savings over the lifespan of the project or asset. And another last question would be what savings and co-benefits will result from completing the action and project, as often there are greenhouse gas mitigation benefits or social benefits that are very often unaccounted for. Another key factor is, according to a 2020 report from FCM and the Insurance Bureau of Canada, is that for every dollar invested in mitigating the effects of severe weather and flooding in Canada, you'll save about $3 to $5 in recovery costs. And so this plan is not designed to stress existing budgets, but to rather open up the discussion and set the priorities for how we want to evaluate and invest down the line.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. Oh, I think Mr. Kakopoulos has his hand up as well, if he wants to chime in.
Through Mr. Chair, and I won't say it nearly as eloquent or intelligently as Shannon did, but I think the answer to your question, Councillor, is it's a bit of both. It is both a la carte menu, so to speak, as well as a roadmap. And I think, to Shannon's point, some of it will be dependent on resources, finances, and our ability to get that. So I think at the end of the day, what we want is council to, support this. And I hear that, I think, very clearly, but how we get to that implementation and how we look at this will definitely be a journey for all of us, and a multi-year journey, multi-term journey for that matter. So a little bit of both to answer your question, Councillor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. One follow-up, probably to Ms. Fernandez and Ms. Harris. Again, I'm sure all of us at some point, or probably all of us many times, have looked up at what the momentous task affecting climate change and kind of reversing some of the trends that we're seeing now. And again, it's not just Lincoln, it's not the region, it's not the province, it's not Canada, it's globally that we have to walk up this massive hill. So just a question, how does this underlie, or how does it layer in with the region's climate plan, the provincial plan, and even the federal plan, so that maybe we're all aligned, so that we can maybe have a little bit more credence and make a more established fight against what's happening?
I guess through you, Mr. Chair. So unfortunately, while a number of LAMs were working together with Niagara Adapts to identify or to develop climate adaptation plans, unfortunately, the region was not at the table. That being said, the region is now starting a stakeholder group with all of the lower tiers as well to identify some of the climate adaptation measures and climate change considerations going forward, to have a broader regional approach as well. So I guess to take a step back, a number of the LAMs did work together. So it is a very unified front from the lower tier municipalities. And then the region is now taking the input from the lower tiers and assessing it from that point. From the provincial level, there's the intent, and you're starting to see more funding coming out of more so of the Build Back Better. So their intent is, again, like Shannon was talking about, of the dollar value, so the $3 to $5 if you were to not do the repair, versus the $1 if you were to do the adaptive measures. So keeping in mind of that, and you are starting to see funding and some support with policies coming from the province, indicating to do the adaptation measures, or if you do have an area where you have experienced some disasters or are anticipating some disasters to try and incorporate those. And the idea of you're starting to see some more funding again from the provincial level, from tree canopies or from kind of that side of it. Overarching with that policy and the federal, there are kind of strategic focuses, standards, and again, funding streams for adaptations to support local governments as they're developing their climate adaptation strategies and implementing them, and trying to help each municipality with their unique impacts. And that's kind of how it does all tie together. I'm sure Shannon will be a bit more eloquent than I was with my description if she does want to chime in. But we do have from the two higher levels, from the federal and provincial, some strategies coming down the line, standards and funding streams. And then the region is trying to work with the lower tier municipalities to bring a cohesive front from the region itself.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. Again, not a question, just a comment. Again, I hope that the region does seek out yours and Ms. Fernandez's voices in this, because again, as the mayor said in her intro to this as part of the report, again, I think Lincoln is a leader, and I hope that you guys have a seat at the table to give your thoughts and help drive the bus a little bit, or the on-demand transit, to keep it cliche. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell, for weaving two presentations together. That's props. Councillor Michalak, you're up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you to Ms. Fernandez. So I have a little bit of trouble, with the declaration of a climate emergency. Explain to me the difference between the declaration of a climate emergency with the acknowledgement of a crisis. This is typically an emergency requires emergency measures to solve a problem that's immediate. To me, a climate emergency is something that will take at least 75 years to cure, if we could even ever cure it. So explain to me the benefit or the difference between a climate emergency or an acknowledgement of a crisis.
Absolutely. Chair, to the councillor, that's a great question. The climate emergency declaration is something that is fairly unique, because as climate change is projected to occur over the next 75 to 100 years, we are already facing the impacts of climate change across the globe and in Southern Ontario as well. The unique climate emergency, the declaration of a climate emergency rather, is unique in that it helps to raise the profile and urgency of collaborative action by individuals, businesses, communities, and all levels of government. Actions that we do take today, investments that we do make in the very near future, will have impacts on climate change, either by mitigating or increasing greenhouse gas emissions, or by deciding the long-term resiliency of assets such as our roads and infrastructure to the impending and projected climate impacts. Due to these climate impacts and projections, over 400 Canadian municipalities, so that's about 10 million citizens, covering over 10 million citizens, joined over 500 global governments to declare climate emergency and committed to recognizing the urgent need to take action against climate change and protect their economies, ecosystems, and communities from those projected impacts. So examples of some of the high-level commitments in various climate declarations across Southern Ontario, for example, are commitments to lowering greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to the changes we're already experiencing, deepening the city's commitment to protect economy, environmental, and the community environments and the community from climate change, immediately increasing the priority of the fight against climate change, and even as something as simple as acknowledging the global scale of the economic, health, environmental, and human impacts of climate change. how we craft the climate emergency declaration to be unique to the town of Lincoln will be a collaborative process with council, with the corporate environmental committee, and with senior management to ensure that its priorities align with the direction that the town wants to move towards, as well as with the specific projected impacts that climate change is going to have in our region.
Appreciate that response. It concerns me because when I'm reading your report, like goal 1.2, declare climate emergency. It's a high priority with a red, and then I see $2 signs in a person. And similar to a restaurant, it seems like that's a level of expense that a town is, being asked to spend. In your report, and if I may, Chair Patrieva, one more question. In your Niagara Adapts engagement report, I read over, did we asked residents for their participation? Did we reach out to anybody, like residents that may not have? My thinking is that this engagement would have been more participated by those suffering negative effects of climate change, as opposed to a broader spectrum of residents where, we're using that engagement report as a measure of a sense of urgency amongst residents. However, the participants, I fear or feel, they would have been participants that have suffered negative effects of climate change. And is that a true indication of the level of importance the town should take overall because of a report, sampling, residents that have been negatively affected, approximately 30?
Pardon me, I was on mute. Through you, Chair, to the councillor. That is a good question about the community engagement that was conducted. Yes, you're right that there were 30 residents that were 30 respondents rather to the latest community engagement conducted by Niagara Adapts. However, that number is made up of municipal staff, council members, and residents. So there is a mix of the respondents. And the initial Niagara Adapts community survey had over 150 respondents. And so there is a wide variety of engagement of respondents that engage with this process. What's really interesting about the numbers for the vision and the overall comments about the plan was that over 80% of the respondents supported or strongly supported the climate adaptation plan and the vision and the goals that were outlined in the survey, with 0% strongly disapproving of it. Once we move into some of the more specific goals, there are those numbers of support are also reflected, with around 75 to 80% continuously supporting or strongly supporting each action. While we move into implementation of this plan, ongoing community engagement is something that is going to be important. We already have a page up on Speak Up Lincoln about the climate adaptation plan that encourages residents to submit their questions and concerns. So overall, climate change action is quite supported by the residents, by a wide variety of residents, as captured by both of the surveys.
Thank you. So go ahead. Are you?
Yeah, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. I just also wanted to note, just for the diversity of the applicants, it was not just a posting of the survey and asking people to come to it. Shannon actually was actively out in the community and speaking with residents at various events, trying to get some additional feedback as well. So there, within that 100 plus respondents, it did have a wide variety and not just people that were directly impacted or have had negative effects already from climate. It was from a diverse group of people. So I just wanted to make that note that it wasn't solely just asking people to respond to the survey through emails or through social media or anything like that. It was also Shannon going out and trying to engage with people as well.
No, it's just in reading the report, it was basically those who wished to participate through social media. That's how it was promoted. That's what I read. I would think that if my road washed away, if my basement flooded, then I would be certainly wanting to participate. But has that happened to the majority of the folks in town? That's and the reason why I'm asking those questions is because I don't know in the legend on page 149 of the agenda, or I'm not sure what page it is of the report, but there's $2 signs. What does a dollar sign mean in relation to each other? What does a dollar sign mean, and what does $2 sign mean?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Mikulik. We wanted the plan was designed to have an estimate of funding and staffing resources required, because each action item itself is an involved process. Once we actually start planning for implementation for each of those specific action items, fleshing out the resources required will occur then. For context, $1 sign is that very few funds are required, or that it already exists within the budget capacity to execute. Whereas $2 signs would be some additional funds required, or, for example, maybe the hiring of a consultant to complete some specialized studies or complete some specialized works. In the case of specifically declaring a climate emergency, the $2 signs was put against it because, as I mentioned earlier, there are upfront capital costs to climate adaptation. For example, when you look at green infrastructure versus traditional gray infrastructure, that, however, have long-term savings values. And so when we compare capital costs to life cycle costs, it is anticipated that some of those capital costs will be higher upfront. So declaring a climate emergency and declaring it and crafting exactly what that would look like for the town is something that's important. Declaring an actual declaration has no cost. However, the impacts and the implementation of what we would like to outline in that climate emergency may have some additional cost to it, but that is something that would be fleshed out prior to, during the actual design of the emergency declaration. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Kirkopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think just to add a little bit to what Shannon was saying and to try to address the councillor's questions, in some ways I look at climate crisis and climate emergency a little interchangeably, and I wouldn't suggest we get into the semantics this evening, but I'm going to say 3 words come to mind on why we look at putting a focus on anything, and those 3 words are focus, accountability, and leadership. And on the focus part, I think we all know that as humans, we're often much more successful when we have a clear vision to focus on. On the accountability part, I think that speaks for itself, allows ourselves internally, council, as well as the public, to hold us accountable on the goals and on the actions we put forward. And on the leadership part, I think there's often benefits in leading these sorts of things. So a conversation for sure when we do come back to council, but again, whether it's a crisis, an emergency, an area of focus, I think in a lot of ways I use all of those terms or that phraseology very interchangeable. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Kirkopoulos. And again, Councillor Mikulik, to think that just people that have issues would answer the question. I mean, my days at Stats Canada would make it statistically inaccurate. So the premise of doing a survey is getting a broad reach, and I for one would do it because I'm interested in climatic change, and I think it needs to be addressed. I've not been flooded or had a wildfire or anything like that. So you got to be careful when you make those type of statements that might shed a wrong light on a survey. So there's groundwork that goes into statistical analysis and laying that groundwork. So, and it needs to be broad ranging. So in no way, shape or form, I think is it narrow focus. So
Just, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just ask Mr. Kirkopoulos a quick question based on his response?
Quick one. Yes.
Is there any legislative or governmental authority? Is there in acknowledging a climate emergency?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think to answer the councilor's question, is there any legislative benefit to it or legislative ability or powers that it gives us or takes away from us or allows us to utilize? I would say I don't think that's why we necessarily want to do it, Councillor. I think in a lot of ways, there's as I said, there's a functioning or a vision that goes with it, a focus. It's about the accountability, and I'll go back to it's about leadership. So it's not about taking or looking to address actions and not going through appropriate channels to address those actions. And I know that's not what you're suggesting, but I think oftentimes when we think of emergencies like the one we're in here in COVID, it comes with certain certain powers with it. I think the declaration of something that is symbolic in nature is in this case is not about usurping resources or usurping delegated authorities, but rather the opposite, and that is it becomes a symbol. And so that's why I said whether you call it a crisis, an emergency, an area of focus, to me those are very interchangeable. And so while language is important, I think in this particular case, that's why you're seeing governments at all levels and all jurisdictions across the globe move in this particular direction. So hopefully that answers your question.
Well, and that answers it. Like, as you mentioned, language is important. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Shannon. This is really, it is a very weighty report. There's no question about it. I would even classify it as a tome when it came to its weighty significance. So thank you very much for your really outstanding efforts to make this as clear as possible. I think you have done a very good job. I'm not so taken up with the idea of declaring an emergency because you can find all kinds of things that we're doing in the town. And I think this report just clarifies even further what many of those are, but also at the regional level around health and welfare in our communities. Public health planning, particularly in the official plan, there's just all kinds of additions that are going in there. Community services for sure, and public works in all the municipalities and at the regional level. When you look at a report like this, you get the big picture, you get that big umbrella. And then what's happening at the departmental level isn't maybe quite as obvious, but there's a lot happening. And it may take some time for this to be obvious. So for me, the greatest value in this report is in us treating it as a master plan. And so that's where my question is, Mr. Chairman, just in case you were wondering. And so, how do you view this report? Because it wasn't, we didn't tender this, we didn't bring in an outside consultant, even so the money for your services come from an outside agency, not the tax rolls. How do you see this fitting in so that we will take it as a master plan to be feathered in with absolutely everything else we are doing, including our annual work plan? Because that's where I really see the value. It means that we fully committed. So what are your thoughts on that?
Through you, Chair, to Mayor, you're absolutely correct. I would agree that it is very much like a master plan. It's an overarching, it was designed to be overarching, to lay out what needs to be done to support the next 20 or so years of the town, and in order to increase the resiliency of the town, not in the short term, not just in the short term, but also in the medium to long term. I would say that using this plan as the beginning, as a roadmap of where we would like to take the town, is an accurate perception.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, now I guess we need to bring in Mr. Kokopoulos because at his level, Mike, how do you see this being considered immediately as part of that master plan approach?
Mr. Chair, I think, to answer the mayor's questions, my thoughts would be, I think like a lot of the other studies that we have done and that we do use, whether it's our parks master plan, whether it's our economic development strategy, I think there's things as we're concurrently going down that path towards adaptation and towards integration that we use. And there's certain actions and things we want to incorporate right now into projects. And those are things that we will and continue to do and bring them to council where appropriate so that decision-making happens at a council level. And at the same time, I think we need to work on a long-term plan, a long-term strategy to address climate change at that 60,000 foot level. So I would suggest, I think it's two concurrent trains kind of going down a path, one that sees us incorporate various actions and immediate types of efforts on various projects, and at the same time looking at it a little bit more holistically. So I don't see them as exclusive to one another.
That's great. So, Mr. Chairman, what I would be looking for next, because I truly think that we are already committed to this, and that having a staff person available to do this work has just brought that home. How do we take this document and then begin to parse out from the work that we're already doing? How do we begin to report on the work that's being done now against this document? Because I think that would be quite an important piece of work to look at, to see what kind of progress we've made, really with a great effort on the part of staff, but maybe, we didn't have to declare an emergency. We're committed to it. We are committed to addressing issues of climate adaptation. And we also know that those conditions are going to change. And I think that Councillor Brunet's comment regarding that email that we got today, how odd that we would get it just out of the blue. But, I sit on the Great Lakes Cities Initiative, and there's a lot of conflicting views about some of the legislation that's out there that's binational. And we can't ignore all these things. And Jillian is involved in answering those questions, as is Shannon. So we're into this now. And I also see that the region is going to be taking a much bigger role. Maybe they're the ones that should be declaring the emergency and also identifying what they're doing, because we don't want to duplicate the work that they're doing. And this is where I'm thinking we need another kind of a report here, Mr. CAO. And I don't really know what your thoughts are on that, but Mr. Chairman, without that, I think we may be walking around in circles a little bit, unintentionally. So if we could have a little more clarity on that, I would certainly be interested.
Okay, Mike?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I could suggest, I think what staff will do is we'll go back. I think there's a number of projects that we absolutely know that Shannon's been engaged in, Jillian's been engaged in, and maybe bring council back a report in the future that looks at existing projects and how we've actually incorporated some of these climate adaptation, climate change principles, actions, and goals. And I think you'll see everything from Jordan Village and low impact development to what we're doing around some of our stormwater management ponds. If I think about the one in Cherry Heights, to a number of projects really right across the municipality, I think council will realize we're actually incorporating a lot of these. Sometimes we don't necessarily say, oh, look at this is climate change, but the underscoring of the efforts and the actions that we're taking really do point to ways to mitigate it. So I see Shannon nodding, so it's a good thing. I think she agrees with me that we will add this to her work plan in terms of coming back and working with us to bring a report forward that I think brings that back for council.
That's great. And Mr. Chairman, as part of that, then I certainly need, I don't know about other members, but I certainly need some clarity from the clerk on the whole issue of item 1.2 and how it fits into the motion when it comes forward. So I'll just leave that and we'll see what Madam Clerk has to say when the time comes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Worship. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, I do want to congratulate you, Shannon, on getting to the climate adaptation plan we have here in front of us tonight. It's been a journey, and you laid it out very nicely in the plan that I think it's been 2 years that you've been working through this, and I think it's a special night to get to a plan in front of us. And thank you for the work that you've done, and really I'm looking at you spearheading this thing. I know there's others on your team that have helped out, but I think it's outstanding that we've now got a document in front of us that lays out all of the things that I see as needed to have a solid plan: the vision, the mission, the goals, the actions, the checks in how you're going to measure against those goals. It's all there. So very nicely done. I do have a couple of questions. On page 22 in the plan, it says that climate impacts were assessed on the town's corporate vulnerability and risk, not that of the overall Lincoln community. And yet when I read the vision, it says a bunch of things in the vision, but one of the items that stood out for me is we're building stronger community. So I wonder if you could speak to that, town's corporate vulnerability and not the overall Lincoln community.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor McPherson, that's a great question. One of the key exercises that we undertook when beginning this plan was understanding the scope and limiting this plan to adaptation and specifically to the corporate level, something that was important because the town, because the town has very limited authority to address risk and circumstances beyond its control. So by putting forward a corporate plan that involves commitment, before involving commitment from businesses, residents, and organizations, it's important that the town leads by example. So as I mentioned earlier, the vision and the action items are very specific to the town's assets, infrastructure, service delivery, and that is where the impacts were measured. There were, for example, impacts that were identified that were related to the community or to mitigation even, for example, and those will be captured when delivering a corporate mitigation plan and a community plan, which are outlined in the action items themselves. When it comes to executing that vision and executing the goals of increasing community resilience, it is through how we do that is through serving the community with our assets, our programs, our policies, etc. So the difference between a corporate and a community scope is really not what adaptations can do for the community, but rather what adaptations are done what adaptation actions are taken at the town level versus those that are done on the individual level or within specific households.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for that, Shannon, and it maybe leads a little bit into my next question. One of the things we hear about on climate change is the reduction of the carbon footprint, and all of us are responsible for a carbon footprint. So I guess when thinking about the community as a whole and not the corporate piece, I start to wonder about what we have in our plan that is specifically to specific actions, recommendations, leadership, whatever we can do to assist our community members in reducing their carbon footprint. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor McPherson, absolutely. The plan outlines the two priority actions, which are to develop a corporate mitigation plan and then a low carbon resilience community plan. So low carbon resilience is a term that encompasses both mitigation and adaptation actions. And so that plan will outline what residents can do, what businesses can do, what households, individuals can do to not only adapt to impending climate change impacts, but also to lower their greenhouse gas emissions to prevent further climate change from occurring.
Okay, and you know, it's a big topic, and it's got a lot of pieces to it. You know, I certainly I'm not expecting that we are going to do any kind of incentives to have our residents purchase electric cars, but you know, I think there possibly is a role played in that area for the town to be providing hookups or batteries or in our planning of new apartments, new gas stations, those types of things. We could incorporate a requirement, let's say, for rechargers, that type of thing. So appreciate again this document in front of us. It is, as the mayor said, it is weighty, and there's lots here. So I'm 100% in. I think there is a climate change challenge that we have, and I think that having a plan in our community says a lot about the focus that we have. So we're with you, and let's start moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. And on those words, we'll go into the motion. So I've got a motion moved by Councillor Michalak to receive and file report PW 05-21 Corporate Climate Adaptation Plan Milestone 4 update. Approve the Town of Lincoln Corporate Climate Adaptation Plan and direct staff to execute the actions outlined in the Corporate Climate Adaptation Plan. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Before we do that, Mayor Easton has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Mayor Easton, go ahead.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to clarify the item 1.2 in terms of the second part of the motion. If we receive and file, no problem, but the approvals, I'm just not prepared to declare an emergency. There may be a time when we may have so much information available to us, but I think the burden of responsibility has been very well laid out here. And so I'm looking for the clerk to provide us with advice in terms of whether 1.2 needs to be removed and we vote on it separately. I don't know how other members feel either. Thank you.
So through you, Chair, so the motion is to approve the plan as a whole. And from my understanding, staff would bring back that declaration at a later time to be refined from council for approval before going forward. So right now we're just approving the plan, and then we would move forward and do the declaration separately at another date.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. That's very helpful.
Okay.
All right, are you ready to call the vote, Councillor Chair Patriva?
We are ready, Madam Deputy Clerk.
Thank you. Councillor Brene?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Michalak?
Yes.
Councillor Patriva?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Regina?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
And that carries, Chair.
Thank you, Devan. We will now consider item 6.3.3, report PW 09-21 Serena Drive and 4th Avenue Community Safety Zones. Do any members of committee have any questions or comments about these two additional community safety zones being added? Councilor Renchema.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is great news. I'm excited about it. I'm happy about it. And I had a couple of questions from a member of the community about just exactly what it means. What does it mean to have a community safety zone? And my understanding is I clarified with Director Graham that increased signage and increased fines as well. So I'm wondering if someone can just explain a little bit exactly what the advantages are. And also if there are increased fines, are we sort of giving Niagara Regional Police the authority to, like, how does this work how does it work?
Through Mr. Yeah, thanks. Through Mr. Chairman to Councillor Rajima. So this is under the Highway Traffic Act. So municipalities are allowed to create a community safety zone in areas of where you want a high level of safety. So the idea is that you put up the signs for motorists, and when they see that sign, it's to raise awareness to the driver that I'm approaching an area where there's a higher degree of caution and safety, slower speeds required, and it also tells the driver that your typical speeding fines or any type of careless driving fines can be doubled. So the police authority have the they have the authority to double fines for people who are disobeying the rules in these areas.
Okay, so it's through the Highway Traffic Act. And so is there anything else that's going to go in place within these particular sections of town related to the community safety zone other than signage and the option for the police to double fines?
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor. So yeah, it's primarily physical signs on the street. We're also going to be promoting it on our Speak Up Lincoln. We have a special page for traffic safety that we want to get the word out to further reinforce what community safety zones are, their importance, and the rules that come with that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You are welcome, Councillor Vinchima. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Director Graham. Thanks, Dave, for bringing this forward. I'm going to try to keep this really quick. I'm just wondering why we didn't extend that community safety zone on Serena all the way to the north area where it touches on to Alyssa, because we are going to see a good chunk of traffic towards the park coming in through that way. I would think, again, just being overly practical, it would make sense to extend it all the way another probably 500 meters or so to that tip of where Serena intersects Alyssa. Just your thoughts?
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor, good question. We thought of that as well. We did evaluate that, and sort of the guidance with community safety zones is that you want to put the sign, or you want the zone in the area where you want that high level of safety, if you will. So, if you're a driver driving on the road, when you approach that zone, that sign, you can see a park, you can see a school, you can see a community center. So that's kind of the guidance with setting community safety zones, is you do want those roadside land uses that require a higher degree than normal. So if we extend it to the north, and you could do that, you sort of reduce the importance, because you're driving through more of a residential area with the sign. So you want that driver, when they approach Rotary Park and the skate park and the Fleming Center, you really want them to understand this is the zone where I need to drive extra careful. So that was the rationale behind that.
Okay, thank you, Director Graham. Mr. Chair, just to follow up. So again, somewhere down the road, if it is a requirement, or we do get a lot of feedback that there are just a lot of kids coming up that corridor, and maybe that extra consideration might be apt, or maybe again putting some other implements on that road with some speed humps or some other of your magic wand tactics. By all means, we have that opportunity to revisit it. Is that correct?
Yeah, through Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, absolutely. Like, let's get this in place. We'll see how it works. We'll see what residents think, get some of their input on some other ideas in that section you're talking about. But yeah, absolutely, we can tweak things moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Timmins.
Thank you very much, Chair Patriva. Through you to Director Graham, I think this is great. I understand the necessity for it. I was just wondering how you landed on those. Did you use the data from the radar, the speed cameras, or how did you determine that was, I can see why, but I'm just wondering how you landed on those two areas. And are you looking at other areas as well?
Through Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, great questions. I would say, it's a combination of a lot of factors. So we do look at our speed data, and if we're seeing some speeding characteristics in these sensitive areas, absolutely. We get a lot of feedback from residents at ward meetings, or just feedback in general about, concerns with safety in these areas. We are so with our traffic safety initiatives, we're looking at how we can improve safety across the community, and looking at where community safety zones, could make sense. So I think we've got a lot of the areas already targeted, but we're absolutely open to looking at more in the community, as we look at more of these. But ideally, you need a lot of those land use factors where you have schools and parks or other important community aspects where you're going to have a lot of people mingling, children, things like that.
Right. No, it makes perfect sense. I think just one area that came to my mind is Heritage Village, where there's a lot of walkers. There may not be a school, but there are a lot of people that walk in certain areas. So perhaps that's an area that could be looked at down the road. But thank you very much. I think it's a great initiative and very much needed in the community. So thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Councillor Timmins. And I brought up to Director Graham today, William Street with Jacob Ames School. Councillor Brunet and I have received numerous complaints about speeding on William Street. And again, with the grade of the hill coming down and the buses and per se. So Director Graham said that he would look at that as well. So we've got no further discussion. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell to receive and file Serena Drive and 4th Avenue Community Safety Zones approval report. Approve the proposed bylaw to establish community safety zones on Serena Drive and 4th Avenue as outlined in the proposed bylaw under Appendix B. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call out the vote.
Councillor Brunet,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor McWick,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton.
Support.
Chair, that carries.
Thank you, Devan. We will now consider item 6.3.4, report PW 10-21 Friesen Neighborhood Phase 2 Water Main Replacement and Road and Infrastructure Rehabilitation Tender Award for you, Ward 1 councillors, a piece of good news. And taking advantage of pricing and the establishment of doing, multi areas and refurbishment on streets. So fabulous for you two and for everyone in the town. I see no questions. So I've got a motion moved by Councillor Manchima to receive and file the Friesen Neighborhood Phase 2 Water Main Replacement and Road and Infrastructure Rehabilitation Tender Award Report, and approve the contract award for the 2021 Friesen Neighborhood Phase 2 Water Main Replacement and Road and Infrastructure Rehabilitation Tender to Rankin Construction Incorporated for the amount of $1,437,475, and approve that the firm of Cole Engineering Group Limited be retained to provide engineering services at a cost of $107,541, and approve that the mayor and town clerk to sign and seal the contract documents on behalf of the municipality. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you, Devan. And Councillor Reimer has declared an interest on this next item, so he will not be taking part. So we will now consider item 6.3.5, report PW 11-21, Queen Street Sanitary Sewer Upsizing Tender Award. The clerk has removed Councillor Reimer. So do members of council have any questions or comments about this? Councillor Bernay.
Thank you, Chair Patrick. I didn't quite get my hand up fast enough on the Friesen neighborhood report, but I just wanted to echo your comments as the chair there. You know, these things don't happen by accident. And to get these tenders advertised in the month of January, tendered in the month of February, and awarded in the month of March, I would hazard to say is not happening in 2 municipalities in the province. And the reflection of that is not only the savings, but the fact that we have 8 tenders, 8 contractors showing interest on both of these projects. And that basically turns into savings. So a great job by our staff. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, you're on. There you
I'm off mute now. Thank you, Councillor Bernay, for those dulcet tones. And I mean, it's fabulous. This is why we do our budget when we do. And here is the proof in black and white. So I see no further discussion. So apropos, the motion is moved by Councillor Bernay to receive and file the Queen Street Sanitary Sewer Upsizing Tender Award Report, approve the contract award for the 2021 Queen Street Sanitary Sewer Upsizing Tender to O'Hara Trucking and Excavating, Inc. for the amount of $954,717.90, and approve the firm of Carey T. Howe Engineering be retained to provide engineering services at a cost of $61,390, and approve the mayor and town clerk to sign and seal the contract documents on behalf of the municipality. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Regina,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you, Devan. And would you kindly let Councillor Reimer back into the proceedings?
I will do. He is just joining us now.
Fantastic. So we have now concluded the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda for this evening. We will now rotate to allow Councillor and Chair Paul McPherson to assume the chair at this time for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. And he has some good news right off the bat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as we are approaching the 9 o'clock hour, I am going to suggest that we take a 10-minute break prior to moving ahead with any other agenda items. So I would ask that we all reconvene here at 9:05. We are 8:54. You're going to get 11 minutes. Please be